Hello, my name is Richard McMurtry, and I'm founder of Californians for Peace in Israel Palestine. This organization is committed to doing public education on both the causes and the solutions to the Israeli Palestinian conflict, which has gone on for much, much too long, and also for doing political advocacy to achieve a just and lasting peace for both Jews and Palestinians in this very troubled land. I'll begin the presentation by talking about four very inspiring but very different visions of what peace would look like and how to get there. And then I'll pause and talk about what's actually happening on the ground in Jerusalem and the West Bank today. Then I'll return and go into more detail about each of the four paths, their strengths, their weaknesses, their limitations. My hope is that you'll consider each of these plans and find the one that you resonate with, that makes sense to you, that you feel you could really support, and find a way to get involved with that path because we need everybody who cares about this issue to get involved in making change. That said, let's talk about the four visions. First, the vision of Jonathan Kattab, a Palestinian lawyer and Christian. In his book, Beyond the Two-State Solution, he makes a case for a single state. And he makes the case that the two-state solution is no longer viable because of the 700,000 settlers sprinkled throughout the West Bank. But his vision includes a commitment to being multi-ethnic and multi-religious, meaning that there would continue to be a Jewish rhythm to public life, but there would also be a Muslim rhythm to public life and a Christian rhythm to public life. And that commitment to a religious culture would be affirmed by the state, supported by the state, and codified in a constitution. That constitution would also guarantee the protection of minority rights, whether Palestinian or Jewish, and protected by an independent and enforced by an independent judiciary. Number two, the vision of a land for all, two states, one homeland. Their vision includes there being two sovereign states, Israel and Palestine, but linked together in an interdependent, collaborative, cooperative confederacy, similar to the European Union. Pursuant to this vision, the confederacy would enable Jews and Palestinians to travel and live throughout the entire land, making the land a shared homeland for both Jews and Palestinians. Number three, Jewish Voice for Peace. Jewish Voice for Peace considers itself anti-Zionist, meaning that they don't believe it is right for Jews to take Palestinian land to make a homeland for Jews. Their principal short-term commitment is to end the war in Gaza and end the violent occupation of the West Bank. They don't have a specific plan for peace, but rather defer to the Palestinians to come up with those details. Their role, as they see it, is to pressure Israel to come to the negotiation table. Fourth is J Street. In Washington, D.C., there is no J Street in between I Street and K Street. So just like there's a gap in the names of streets in Washington, D.C., J Street considers itself filling a gap in the lobbying in Washington for Israel. They consider themselves pro-Israel, pro-peace, pro-democracy, pro-equality. Their vision is one of an Israel that is secure, strong, democratic, and integrated into the economy and culture of its 22 Arab neighbors. Intrinsic to their vision is a commitment to a Palestinian state. So that's the overview of the four paths. I'd like to pause here and talk about what's happening in the West Bank and Jerusalem. I'll begin with a 15-minute video that's an interview by J Street at its March 2026 convention in Washington, D.C. of two Israeli Jewish peace organizations, Shalom Akshav, Peace Now, Ir Amin, City of Peoples, whose focus is on the expansion of settlements in Jerusalem and the West Bank. And then I'll show two clips from the BBC about what does this settler violence against Palestinian farmers actually look like? So you get a real feel for what's happening there.
I think it's difficult, but it's also encouraging to be here.
Yeah, and Amy mentioned we had as a speaker at the very end of the first plenary today, Senator Chris Van Hollen from Maryland, who's one of our heroes at J Street, one of the heroes of the Israeli Palestinian pro-peace, human rights, pro-democracy world. And he did acknowledge the vital importance of organizations like Shalom Achshav, like Iramim, that are carrying on in a very, very difficult environment. And so I guess I also would love to get a few words from each of you for folks watching online with us at Word on the Street to tell us a little bit about your organizations and the focus that you each have. I'll start with you, Amy. I mean, I'd love to hear about Iramim, and I've known it forever. I lived in Jerusalem when it was first getting going, and really would love to hear more from you about what the work is that you do.
Yeah, sure. So for those that do not understand Hebrew, so Ir Amim means city of nations or city of peoples. And it is essentially, it is representative of what Jerusalem is, not only Ir Amim's vision of it being a binational, multi-religious and multicultural city, but it actually is the character of the city it is today and has been for so many years. And Iramim essentially works at the intersection of human rights and geopolitics. So we have been around for about 20 years now, and we have been working to advance a political resolution to the conflict, namely based on the establishment of two capitals, of a shared capital in Jerusalem, a two-state framework. However, that is then configured in the future. We have a lot of creative solutions to that, but at the same time addressing all of the human rights abuses in the absence of some sort of political resolution at present.
And Lior, your organization is really the grandparent of them all, really the original Israeli peace organization. I'm sure that most of the people watching do know about Shalom Achshav, Peace Now, but perhaps you could just give us a little picture of the work today. What is Shalom Achshav doing in this environment now, almost 50 years on from its original founding?
Yeah, well, so we're trying to do the same thing, and just in a much harder climate. So we're monitoring everything that's going on in the West Bank, in the settlements in East Jerusalem as well, but trying to keep it alive in Israel, to get the people in Israel to fight for the two-state solution, for the end of the occupation. And that's what we're trying to do every day. So we wake up and go to work and try to convince Israelis through different ways that this is our mission, this is our identity, and this is our future. So that's what we have to do.
And both organizations, I think, are very aligned with J Street in the concept that the desire to find a way to resolution between Israelis and Palestinians is essential to the future of Israel. It's essential to the future of an Israel that is democratic in character, that is Jewish in nature, that is secure. And this is the ultimate act of being pro-Israel, is to pursue the work that you're doing. But we have today a government that is probably as far removed from the principles and the values that J Street stands for, that Iramim and Shalom Achshav stands for, and they are actively pursuing the killing of the ability to have a political resolution to this conflict. What I really want to dig in with our two experts today, and I think for folks watching, what you get when you come to a convention like this is you really get a chance to get exposed to the foremost experts in the world on the issues that we work in and day out. Jerusalem is the heart of the conflict. For both peoples, Jerusalem is mythic. It's not just a real city where 1 million people live and conduct their daily lives. It has a mythology to it, whether it is for Christians and Jews and Muslims, or it's for Palestinians and Jews in a national context. This government and the settlement movement are trying to kill the idea that the city can be not divided, but made into the capital of both peoples. And I'm wondering if you could tell us some of the things that have been happening in the last year or two under this government, even as we're fighting a war in Gaza. And the world has their eyes on the disaster, the moral disaster of Gaza. Jerusalem is under the spotlight of the settlement movement. And maybe you can tell us some of the Sheikh Jarrah and other areas that you're working on and have your eye on.
Yeah, exactly. And Jeremy, I think it's really important that you did mention how much, because our attention has been so much focused on Gaza and also in the West Bank, East Jerusalem has really been overshadowed and has not garnered the attention that it really deserves. And one of the things that we have seen a mass acceleration of have actually been settlement advancements. And we're not just talking about the expansion of existing settlements. We're talking about literally brand new settlements, the confiscation of Palestinian lands to establish new settlements. We're talking about 20,000 housing units for brand new settlements throughout East Jerusalem that, you know, when we're talking about on the ground today, it really impedes the development of Palestinian neighborhoods. It ends up being a coercive measure to push them out of the city, because the two main guiding posts for Israeli policymaking in Jerusalem has been territory and land, and has been demographics and population. So how do we take over as much land and territory as possible? And we're seeing this in the West Bank as well. But how do we also decrease or curb the Palestinian population and increase the Jewish population? And one of the main avenues is through taking over as much land as possible and then filling them and populating them with Jewish settlements and with Israelis. And so we have seen this explosion of settlements that no one was really talking about, because it's happening all throughout the West Bank right now, and then all of the destruction and the catastrophe in Gaza. But then on the flip side of that is that we've also seen Israeli authorities and the Israeli government really taking advantage to carry out mass expulsion and displacement. And the way that it takes place, it's very different than in the West Bank. In the West Bank, it's being carried out by violent, brutal settlers that are, yes, they're working at the behest of the government and the Israeli authorities or the military, but it looks a little bit different in East Jerusalem. It's institutionalized. It's carried out by house demolitions. Why? Because of Palestinians lacking building permits. But these building permits are impossible to acquire because of Israeli policymaking. And so it's institutionalized. It's like when we compare it back to the Jim Crow laws here in the United States and segregation, it was institutionalized. It was the law of the land. In addition to that, what we've seen is also this mass acceleration of forced evictions and settler takeovers of homes that have really increased since October 7th, because all attention and all eyes have been off of East Jerusalem. And so it enables the authorities to be able to carry out these moves without really generating a lot of pushback. And so that is really what's happening. And when we're talking about the implications for a future political resolution, but also just in terms of violations of international law, what are these implications? What are these ramifications for the future if we really want to acquire in a time and a place to have a political resolution that is going to achieve both peace and security and equality and human rights for all? This is what foils the prospects for that.
And Lior, on the West Bank, outside the boundaries of East Jerusalem, there is a set of moves that has been undertaken by the government literally within the last 2 weeks, just before the outbreak of this war. Unprecedented set of new rules. And I would love if you could give us a little bit of insight into some of the elements of that set of cabinet decisions. What are the changes that the government has made? What are the implications of some of those changes?
Well, thank you, Jeremy. And you know, to follow up on your question and to Amy, what she described is going on in East Jerusalem, what's happening in the West Bank is very severe. It's taking over a complete, takeover of the West Bank through settlements and through eviction of Palestinians through settler violence. And I think what you're asking about, the latest cabinet decisions, is a continuation of this policy, just another dramatic sort of decisions by the government. This this time an assault on private property. Now, if you look, and that's like they made several decisions. The most dominant one is an assault on private property. One of them is to enable settlers to take over, to purchase lands or private lands of Palestinians in the West Bank, something that is forbidden for them to do today. It's much more difficult for them to do. Now they've opened up their ability to do so, opening it up for possible fraud or other sort of mechanisms, systematic the purchases of Palestinian lands, which is very dangerous. And the second is to sort of declassify hundreds of thousands of lands in the West Bank and to make them from private Palestinian land to state land, a process that is very expensive, that is very long, that is an act of annexation. And this is sort of the major decisions that they've made. Another decision that they've made, which went a little bit under the radar, is the ability to demolish Palestinian homes in Palestinian cities, in areas A and B, something that the military did in the past solely for security reasons. Now they took the authorities to do so also under the justifications of the environment or water purposes or archaeology. So now they're bringing the military more authorities to destroy Palestinian homes also in areas A and B in Palestinian cities. So very dramatic decisions, while the focus is, of course, taking over of Palestinian private lands. And also Atarot, which is also a big plan of those in the business, which is being discussed and possibly approved in the coming weeks. Another big plan for 9,000 housing units in the north part of Jerusalem. So massive changes on the ground under this government, things that in the past were weren't believable, that we wouldn't believe that it would happen. Certainly determining how the possibility of a two-state solution, making it much more difficult, are being approved under this government. But to go back to your question, I think, the one thing that you see most under this government is the proliferation of outposts and violent outposts and settler violence. We've counted at Peace Now, I think it's 186 outposts, new outposts under this government in 3 years, nearly 90 in last year alone. That's almost 2 outposts a week, an outpost and a half a week. I think B'Tselem counts for more than 50 Palestinian communities that have been evicted completely due to settler violence. The UN accounts for 1,800 or over 1,800 settler violence incidents in 2025 alone. So this is really, I know it's anarchy led by the state in purpose of taking over territory and evicting Palestinian population, the weakest Palestinian populations, out of their lands. And I think that international pressure was really important and is really important to prevent it. And we saw that under Biden, they went as far as to sanction very violent settlers who were involved in this, and eventually evolved into actually also sanctioning settler institutions. And this was really important and showed, and for a moment there was a promise that actually something could stop this, the Israeli government from, because they're not acting on this, to put pressure on them to stop this. But unfortunately, under Trump, this was all back, and they feel that they can do whatever they want. And under this government, with Ben Gvir as the minister of the police, Smotrich and Strzok as ministers are responsible for the West Bank, for the occupied territories, and of course, under Netanyahu's responsibility, settler violence is something that is really shameful. And when we think about it as a state of the Jewish people, it's really hard for us to grasp that this is happening on a regular basis in such a violent way, communities being suffering from this. It's really disastrous, I believe.
Yeah, and it is immoral. It is against Jewish values. It's against international law. It should be against Israeli law. And to be at the front lines of urging that the United States do something about this is the ultimate pro-Israel act, because what we're doing is trying to help Israel to ensure it hangs on to its soul, that it hangs on to the ability to ultimately separate and have another sovereign state for the Palestinian people next to it. And these are pro-Israel actions. And so J Street is very proud to be supporting the West Bank Violence Prevention Act, which is a piece of legislation. And those watching online, hopefully you've heard about this through J Street emails and J Street notices. We are advocating strongly. More than half of Democratic senators and Democratic members of Congress at this point are co-sponsors of this legislation. When the control of the House and Senate shift, when control of the White House shifts, this will again become the law of the land. It won't just be an executive order. We will pass legislation that codifies sanctions against these entities and sanctions against these settlers. The tide will turn, and it's the involvement of J Street in support of incredible work that's being done on the ground that's going to make sure that this voice carries the day.
BBC News has witnessed an attack by dozens of Israeli settlers on a group of Palestinians in the occupied West Bank. The violence comes as Israel's government prepares to sign off the building of thousands of new homes elsewhere in the territory. That plan, which is illegal under international law, would, according to one far-right minister, bury the idea of a Palestinian state. Lucy Williamson was in the West Bank near the illegal outpost of Or Nahman when Palestinian villagers came under attack, and a warning: there are some scenes in her report which you may find distressing.
To bury the idea of a Palestinian state, extremist settlers kill Palestinian trees. Brahim's family have farmed olives here for generations. This week, he said, trees were hacked to pieces by settlers who've set up camp on a nearby hill. Ties to his past cut down by the politics of today.
Fear is natural, but there is something stronger than fear that drives me to stay here. The scent of my ancestors and an attachment dating back hundreds of years.
As we stood there, masked settlers carrying sticks charged down the hill and across the field towards us. A completely unprovoked attack.
We have to go, Fred. Get out of here, guys.
As we pull back along the road, some of Brahim's neighbours turn up with catapults and stones. As settlers on a quad bike chase away a white truck carrying local volunteer emergency workers. This has now escalated into open confrontation between settlers and local Palestinians, with more people coming to join the fight on either side. Locals say this is happening almost every day now, and these are the tactics settlers are using to take the land, field by field. The speed and spread of this attack was breathtaking. Dozens of settlers fanning out across the hills. We watched them break into buildings, methodically setting fire to vehicles and homes. Shepherds rushing their flocks away as the hillside breaks into flames. In just a couple of hours, this conflict has spiraled from one olive grove all across these hills. Settlers have been chasing Palestinians off their land. Several houses have been set on fire, and the arrival of the army has done little to stop it. Palestinians from across the area arrived to help, but the army has sealed off the main road. The army later told us that Palestinians had burnt tires and that 4 Israelis were treated at the scene. Rifa was trying to reach her husband, trapped in their farmhouse, but the army pointed their weapons and sent me back, she said.
Every other day the settlers do this to us. They attack us, cut down the olive trees, and burn the farms. This is not alive. No one can stop them. We have nothing to resist them with. They have weapons, we have nothing.
We weren't able to speak to any of the settlers involved. The local settlers' council told us there were elements on both sides seeking provocation, which it strongly condemned. Later that night, 18-year-old Hamdan Abu Alaya was shot by Israeli troops in a Mraya village nearby. He later died in hospital. Today at his funeral, his mother told us he'd gone to see the fires lit by settlers nearby. I raised him for 18 years, and he was gone in a minute, she told us. The Israeli army told us they'd shot at terrorists, throwing rocks and Molotov cocktails at them. His father said he refused to show the Israelis his tears. They thought if they killed our son, we'd leave, he said.
I will not shout and scream and say, why is he gone? I'm not sad that he passed. I encourage young men to do anything they can against the criminal occupier.
At the local mosque, a hero's welcome. In the language of this conflict, each birth and each burial only strengthens their ties to the land. Lucy Williamson, BBC News, the occupied West Bank.
Since the October the 7th attacks by Hamas, Israeli pressure on Palestinian civilians in the occupied West Bank has risen sharply. Settler attacks have increased and Israeli military raids have displaced thousands. There's also been an acceleration in the building of Israeli settlements, which are illegal under international law. Our international editor, Jeremy Bowen, has spent time in the occupied West Bank and a warning that his report contains distressing images from the start.
It took 10 days for Israel to release the body of Ordi Hadawin so he could be buried in Al-Khair, the village where he lived and where he was killed by a Jewish settler. On the 28th of July, Ordi filmed this video of a confrontation at the gates of the Jewish settlement right next to the village. Local people believed the digger was going to cut off their water and power. On another camera, the settler at the gate is Yinon Levy, already sanctioned by Britain and the EU for threatening Palestinians at gunpoint and destroying their property to force them off their land. Ordi's video is on the left. Levy raises his weapon, seems to take aim, and fires. The shot hits Ordi. He drops his camera as he falls. He died soon after. Levy pleaded self-defense to manslaughter and was freed by a sympathetic judge. Ordi Hadawin was a well-known Palestinian activist and journalist. His blood has been left where he fell, around 40 or 50 yards away from where the shot was fired. Family and village elders who gathered to mourn him said he took no part in the confrontation, filming, holding his 5-year-old son, Watan, who saw him die. They said 16 of their relatives were arrested by Israel after the killing. Unlike the shooter, some are still being held.
Life is difficult. The Israelis are harassing our livestock and detaining people. They want us to leave our land and village.
We are standing next to your brother's blood here. What impact will his killing have on the village?
His death has left a hole in our hearts, but it's given us strength to keep fighting for our land.
The violence started during work to extend the Jewish settlement of Carmel. The project continues, protected by Israeli security forces. Violence by Jewish settlers against West Bank Palestinians has increased sharply since Hamas attacked Israel on the 7th of October 2023. The United Nations estimates there are 4 attacks every day in the West Bank aimed at forcing Palestinians out. This little oasis was chosen by a local Jewish leader, Mayor Simcha, for our talk on the day of the funeral in Al-Khair.
Today in Al-Khair, there's a funeral of an Arab guy.
Thank God, he said. Religious settlers like Simcha believe God gave this land to the Jews. He is a happy man. The Palestinians, he says, have lost hope.
There is still opposition to our presence in the land, but the enemy is starting to slowly understand they have no future here. I ask you and the people of the world, why are you so interested in those Palestinians so much? Why are you obsessed with them? The Palestinians don't interest me. I care about my people.
The Israeli military, the IDF, is also putting Palestinian civilians under pressure. One example, back in February, as the army attacked armed groups in Tulkarem's refugee camps in the northern West Bank, soldiers cleared areas, Gaza-style, destroying civilian infrastructure. 6 months later, the camps are largely empty. Most of more than 30,000 Palestinian civilians the army ordered out of their homes across the northern West Bank have not been allowed back. Only a few have. This couple let us follow them home. She asked not to be identified. It was the first time she'd seen their home since February. The house was burnt out. The TV and the fridge were gone, they believe all done by IDF soldiers who had controlled the area.
When I saw it, I thought, this isn't a house. It's a nightmare. I wish I was dreaming and hadn't seen the house like this. What did we do to deserve this? We are just civilians. Our dreams, our joys, our gatherings, everything was in this house. What am I supposed to tell my children when they come and see the house like this?
Next to a new fence erected by Israel between the Palestinian village of Sinjar and the West Bank's main north-south road, Yehuda Shaul, a prominent Israeli opponent of the occupation, offered an analysis rare among Israelis, widespread among Palestinians, and increasingly accepted in Europe.
I think while we see a war of extermination in Gaza, in the West Bank we see a massive campaign by the state and the settlers in order to basically ethnically cleanse as much land of the West Bank from Palestinians.
Of course, if Mr. Netanyahu was here or any of his supporters, they'd say, what a load of rubbish. This is about Israeli security against terrorism and attacks on Jews. What do you make of that?
If October 7 taught us one thing is, if you really care about protecting Israelis and Palestinians' life, you need to take care of the root causes of the violence.
Which are?
Decades of brutal military occupation, displacement of Palestinians in a conflict that is going on for about 100 years.
Inside Sinjar, the mayor showed me where Jewish settlers killed 2 Palestinian men a month ago. One of them was a US citizen, like many Palestinians in this part of the West Bank.
They attacked us in the morning, in the evening, in the night, and just to immigrate from here.
And you're going to stay or you're going to go?
We will stay. By the way, I have a green card from America, and my wife and my kids is American citizen, okay? But after I see this, I have a decision. I will stay here till I die.
At some stage, the war in Gaza will wind down. These hills and valleys are still heating up. Jeremy Bone, BBC News, on the West Bank.
So how do we end this nightmare of violence? And to those who are sensitive to the so-called one-sidedness in this discussion of Israeli-Palestinian violence, yes, let's admit that there's been violence on both sides, and the whole point is to stop it all. Not by ascribing blame to who's the most guilty party, but by dealing with the root causes of the problem and creating the political mechanisms to move us forward on a path towards peace for both peoples. With that said, I'd like to go into more detail on each of the 4 paths. Jonathan Kattab is a Palestinian lawyer and head of the legal committee negotiating the 1994 Cairo Agreement between Israel and the Palestinian Liberation Organization. He is founder of Nonviolence International and the human rights group Al-Haq. He currently serves as executive director of the North American branch of Friends of Sabeel, the voice of Palestinian Christians. His basic premise is that Zionism and Palestinian nationalism can coexist in the entire land of Palestine, Israel, one homeland for both peoples. But it requires both sides to focus on what is essential and to compromise on what is not essential. He conceptualizes the conflict between Jews and Palestinians as an ideological conflict, one in which Palestinians totally reject Zionism and its movement to create a Jewish state in Palestine, and one in which Zionists have no room for Arab or Palestinian nationalism, or any Arabs in historic Palestine, except as individuals on sufferance, not as equals. Conflict is built into the vision of other as wholly other. He also premises his proposal on the observation that the classic model of the two-state solution is no longer possible. In his view, a Palestinian state cannot exist without the removal of hundreds of thousands of Jewish settlers that have moved to the West Bank and East Jerusalem, and that removal of these settlers is not politically possible. And because these settlements are so geographically scattered throughout the West Bank and East Jerusalem, that a contiguous Palestinian state is no longer geographically viable. He then goes on to enumerate what he considers the minimum requirements for both Zionism and Palestinian nationalism. For Zionism, he lists a homeland with the right of return to Israel of any Jew in the world, lasting security for Jews in Israel, a Jewish rhythm to public life. For example, Saturday is Shabbat. Life comes to a standstill on Yom Kippur. A Jewish calendar and Jewish culture is emphasized in public life. Hebrew is the language of the land. There's a right to live anywhere in Israel, Palestine, not just the Israel of the 1967 borders. Democracy is the political framework of the country. He then goes on to say what are the minimum requirements for peace for Palestinian nationalism. He lists ironclad, constitutionally protected equality and freedom from discrimination. Palestinian refugees would have the right of return to Israel Palestine. Reparations would be provided to resettle Palestinian refugees in both Israel and Palestine. There would be the right to freely move. There would be the right to freely move and live in all parts of Israel Palestine. Democracy would be the political framework for the country. Arabic would be recognized equally with Hebrew, and the state must acknowledge and respect Palestinian identity, culture, language, and religious feelings. So he then comes up with a very clear synthesis of those minimum requirements of both sides as the elements of a path to peace. Israel-Palestine would be a hybrid state whose boundaries include all of historic Palestine, that is, current Israel, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza. The state would embrace all the essential elements of Zionism and Palestinian nationalism. There would be a Jewish right of return for Jews throughout the world to come to Israel, Palestine, but there would also be a Palestinian right of return for Palestinian refugees throughout the world to return to Israel, Palestine. Limits might have to be established to the rate of return to make it feasible to integrate the immigrants into the economy of the land. But the right to return would be extended to both peoples. Reparations would be offered to help resettle Palestinian refugees in Israel, Palestine. Jews in Palestine would be free to move freely. Jews and Palestinians would be free to move and to live throughout the whole land. Arabic and Hebrew would be official languages, and they would be taught in all schools. All three monotheistic religions, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, would be respected and recognized by the state. For example, Friday and Saturday would be official holidays. Christians could take off a half a day on Sunday. There would still be a Jewish rhythm to the life of the country, but there would also be a Muslim and Christian. There would be a dual system of religious courts and secular courts. Those who wish to be subject to religious courts could do so, for example, for dealing with marriage and divorce. But secular courts would be binding. The country would be a parliamentary democracy and a constitution would be adopted. The constitution would protect minority rights and codify the protection and support for religion. There would be an independent judiciary. It would take a 4/5 vote. It would take a 4/5 vote of constitutional court to change the constitution, with at least 2 members being Jewish and at least 2 members being Arab. There would be a ministry of cooperation and coexistence. Its job would be to foster understanding between the communities by teaching the history and culture of each community to the other, and by promoting joint projects. Preventing communal strife would not be left to the goodwill of ordinary citizens, but would be made a collective priority of the state. Considerable resources would be applied to it. No less than 10% of the defense budget would go to this ministry, since security is indeed a vital concern, and the danger to the safety of individual Jews in particular comes primarily from internal threats fostered by decades of hatred and conflict. What are the obstacles to this path? Jonathan acknowledges that one of the major obstacles to implementation of a proposal is what he calls the Holocaust syndrome. He defines that as the belief that only brute force stands in the way of the next Holocaust, and that serious proposals for peace are viewed as hopelessly naive. He also acknowledges that it requires trust in the constitutional protections to be enshrined in a new constitution to not be subject to change at the whim of the majority partner, whether it be Palestinian or Jewish. His proposal to address this is the 4/5 vote required of the Constitutional Court. However, one could make an argument that is asking too much of Israelis at this stage to accept the abolishment of the Jewish state. Second path, a land for all, 2 states, 1 homeland. This approach was developed by hundreds of Jews and Palestinians working together for hundreds of hours to develop creative solutions to every deadlock that has prevented peace in the past. Its advantage over the Kitab plan is that it allows for 2 states, 1 Israeli and 1 Palestinian, so those attached to the continuing existence of Israel can feel their attachment respected. But despite there being 2 states, the Land for All proposal envisions an interdependent confederacy of the 2 states, similar to the European Union, which would function very similarly to the 1 state proposed by Qatar. The leaders of A Land for All are Dr. Rula Hadal and Mai Pundak. Rula is the Palestinian co-executive director of A Land for All. She's also an Israeli citizen and has a doctorate in political science from Hanover University in Germany and is a research fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute in Jerusalem. Mai Pundak is the Israeli co-executive director of A Land for All. She has a master's degree in law and is a graduate of Mondale School for Educational Leadership in Jerusalem. She previously worked for New Israel Fund. A Land for All was founded in 2012. Its basic premise is that a land for all is that both peoples, Jewish and Palestinian, have deep bonds with the land of all of historic Palestine. And its second premise is that it rejects completely the notion that 2 peoples are inherent enemies. And so its vision is based on creating equality, cooperation, and codependency between the 2 interdependent peoples rather than separation into 2 opposing states. The basic elements of their proposal include 2 sovereign states with democracy in both states and protections of equal rights for both Jews and Palestinians in both states. 2 states would be linked by a confederacy similar to that of the European Union. The confederacy would be empowered to deal with joint matters like water, climate, certain aspects of health, joint management of Jerusalem. There would be eventually no border control between the 2 states so as to ensure freedom of movement and freedom of residence throughout the confederacy for both Jews and Palestinians. Palestinians would be guaranteed a right of return with restitution of their lands or compensation when restitution was not possible. The Jewish right of return for Jews throughout the world would remain in effect. Jerusalem would be the capital of both countries, with a joint Jewish-Palestinian council to manage the unified city. There would be commitments to protect the security of their own citizens and the other country as well. Why is this a good vision? It provides each country with a sovereign state, with the people to protect it. It provides both peoples with a sovereign state with the power to protect its citizens. Jerusalem, as the capital, both acknowledges the importance of the city to both peoples. The right of return to Palestinian refugees would resolve the thorniest issue in the way of ending the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This would probably need to be phased to avoid overwhelming the resources of either state, but simply guaranteeing the right of return and beginning the process would go a long way to creating a sense of justice and trust in the resolution of the conflict. Their plan avoids the mass evacuation of settlers envisioned by the original two-state solution. Such an evacuation would be a nightmare to implement. As a result of being guaranteed equality under the law, Palestinians in Israel would commit to live in peace, providing the security that Israeli Jews hunger for. The freedom of movement allows both peoples to enjoy and connect with their homeland as a whole, and to participate in an integrated economy. This proposal creates institutions of cooperation that over time, perhaps decades, would build a sense of trust and connection between the two peoples. The third plan is Jewish Voice for Peace. The vision of Jewish Voice for Peace is a world where all people from Palestine, Israel to the US live in freedom, justice, equality, and dignity. They imagine Jewish Israelis joining Palestinians to build a society rooted in human rights rather than oppression, equality rather than supremacy, dignity rather than domination, democracy rather than dispossession, a society where every life is precious. Their executive director is Stephanie Fox, who worked for 16 years for Jewish Voice for Peace. She was a public health practitioner and a public policy researcher and analyst. Jewish Voice for Peace was founded in 1996, and as of 2024, it has 32,000 members. It is anti-Zionist, meaning that it is against taking Palestinian land as a means of creating a Jewish homeland in Palestine. It is pro-Palestine rights and pro-Palestine. It supports the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement created by a coalition of Palestinian civil society organizations to put pressure on Israel to come to the negotiating table to craft a just peace with Palestinians. It has no specific plan for peace, but rather defers to Palestinians negotiating with Israelis to determine the form that peace will take. It opposes the Gaza war as genocide, the West Bank settler violence as ethnic cleansing, and Israeli society in general as characterized by systematic discrimination, which they label as apartheid. It has a sister organization, Jewish Voice for Peace Action, which supports legislation and election of congressional candidates committed to freedom for Palestine. The fourth plan is J Street, founded in 2007, considers itself to be pro-Israel, pro-peace, pro-democracy. Its major goal is to assure that Israel is secure, democratic, and the homeland of the Jewish people. It supports the creation of a Palestinian state as necessary for Israel's survival. Its executive director is Jeremy Ben-Ami. He's born in New York, of parents born in Palestine and of Russian immigrants to Palestine. He's a lawyer by training and a policy advisor to Bill Clinton. J Street supports Israeli recognition by and integration into the economy of its 22 Arab neighbors, including Palestine. They support an end to the Israeli occupation of Palestinian territory, U.S. recognition of Palestine as a sovereign nation, right of return of Palestinian refugees to Palestine but not to Israel, financial aid to Palestinian refugees to secure permanent homes in the countries in which they reside, Jerusalem as capital of Israel and East Jerusalem as capital of Palestine, freedom of access of all peoples to holy sites throughout Israel, Palestine, sanctions against individuals and organizations in the West Bank engaging in violent acts against Palestinians, but opposes sanctions against Israel for not doing anything to curtail settler violence. It further supports disarming and replacing Hamas in the Gaza Strip, promotes strengthening the Palestinian Authority by promoting elections and restoring predictable revenues to the Palestinian Authority. J Street opposes the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement promoted by a large coalition of Palestinian civil society organizations and supported by Jewish Voice for Peace. It also opposes the expansion of settlements in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Okay, so those are the various plans. What are the differences between them? And what are their strengths and weaknesses? Jonathan Katab's One State and A Land for All's Confederacy of Two States are the most detailed views of what peace would look like in Israel-Palestine. They both more explicitly address how the human dimension of the conflict would be resolved, namely through constitutional protections for minority rights, institutions of economic cooperation, explicit efforts to heal the cultural divide, freedom of both peoples to travel and live throughout the land, and the right of return of refugees. Jewish Voice for Peace has no plan for peace, but they defer to Palestinian-Israeli negotiations to determine what form peace will take. This is the big gap in their vision. J Street's plan is more explicit on what Israel needs, but less clear on how Palestinian needs would be met. They provide a state for Palestinians, but with an emphasis on separation and no clear path for social, economic, and communal equality and integration. Katab's vision is more explicit about how one state solution would make room for Jewish, Christian, and Muslim religions, and how the country would retain a Jewish rhythm to public life, but also develop a Muslim and a Christian one. The biggest failing of Katab's plan is that it requires one to have faith that constitutional protections and an independent judiciary will be able to prevent one side of the conflict dominating and oppressing the other side. His solution does not address the fear of Jews that a Palestinian majority will eliminate the Jewish state. His solution is constitutional enshrinement of the Jewish dimension to the state, with a constitutional court requiring 4/5 vote to make changes. A Land for All vision provides a creative, innovative structural solution to the fear of a Palestinian majority in Israel. It requires Palestinians living in Israel to vote in Palestine at the national level, and requires Jews living in Palestine to vote in Israel at the national level. No trust in constitutional protection is needed, Time living in peace with institutions of cooperation and fostering cross-cultural understanding may create, over time, decades perhaps, the trust needed for a one-state solution. JVP's strength is developing pressure on Israel to come to the negotiating table, to end the war in Gaza and end the occupation of the West Bank, which are the first steps on the path to peace. J Street's strength is its ability to appeal to Jews and Christians and others who deeply believe in the importance of maintaining the state of Israel. J Street's opposition to the war in Gaza and settler violence in the West Bank is an important message to transmit to this segment of the American electorate. Their efforts to support election of congressmen who can bring Israel to the negotiating table is also very important. Their refusal to support sanctions against Israel limits their advocacy to moral outrage and wrist slapping rather than effective pressure to change the government and the government's policies towards Palestinians. What can Americans do? Join, donate, and get involved with the organization that most aligns with your values and beliefs. Join, donate to, and find ways to support one or more of these organizations. Google their websites. Click on join or donate or both. Second, send letters to your senators and to your congressmen. Here's an example of such a letter. I recently heard a presentation about paths to a lasting and just peace in Israel Palestine. One called A Land for All, Two States, One Homeland, and another called Beyond the Two-State Solution. Could you have your staff review these two paths to peace and get back to me as to whether either is a path you could endorse? Here is a link to a 20-page booklet about A Land for All. Here is a link to the booklet Beyond the Two-State Solutions. So the whole point of this is simply to bring more attention to our elected officials about these paths to peace and try to push them to consider them, seriously consider them, and explain why they can, whether they can support it, or if not, why not. So what you can also do is join us. Send an email to Californians for Peace in Israel Palestine at baymoon.com. Put your name. Are you interested in being on our mailing list? Are you interested in working with us? And please rank these paths. Tell us which ones you like. That concludes the presentation.